Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a supernatural horror film, Things Heard and Seen. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie opens up with a quotation from a mystic philosopher, Swedenborg, declaring that things in heaven are more real than things in the world. During the winter 1980, a man, George, is driving back to their home in the countryside. He parks his car in the garage. He appears surprised as he finds blood dripping from their room on the higher floor. He then comes upstairs and finds his daughter playing on the sofa. After that, he frantically runs into the field carrying his daughter. The scene then flashes back to the spring before that. George and his wife, Catherine, are celebrating their daughter's birthday in their city apartment. Catherine is suffering from an eating disorder, so her friend reminds her to eat more. Meanwhile, George recently finished his dissertation, allowing him to get a job as a university professor in the countryside. George and his family will move and live there. Because of that, Catherine will give up her job as an art restorer in the city. One day, George announces to Catherine that he has finally found a house in the countryside, so they decide to move to the countryside. The realtor says that the house was built in the year 1800. Catherine takes notice of an old piano left in the house. At night in their new house, the couple has an intimate moment when Catherine suddenly smells car exhaust fumes. Meanwhile, their daughter notices the clown statue is blinking. The chair suddenly moves. In fear, she rushes to her parents' room. The following day, George meets the university chairperson. They talk about the mystic Swedenborg. As a welcome gift, the university chairperson gives him a Swedenborg's book about the world of spirits. An art depicting a passage to heaven is apparent in its cover. Meanwhile, in their house, a friendly young man, Eddie, and his younger brother visit Catherine. They offer her help to renovate the house. Also, the younger brother offers to babysit her daughter. Catherine gets their contact number. But unbeknownst to her, the two are the children of the Vale couple, who formerly owned the house. At night, she informs George that she will hire the two. She comes to the kitchen, and accidentally finds an old Bible. In one of its pages, the first owner of the house, Jacob Smith, is declared to be damned. She then comes to wash the dishes. She accidentally finds a ring stuck in the sink area. As she holds it, she suddenly feels a spiritual energy passing by. The following day, she comes to the library to investigate the history of their house. She soon finds an image of Jacob Smith and his wife, the first owner of their house. Meanwhile, at the university, George flirts with a young student called Beauty. Apparently, she is a friend of Eddie, so she immediately recognizes George and his family. George seems really attracted to her, so when he comes home, he does a hormone release in the bathroom while thinking about her. Catherine arrives and catches him doing his smelly business. Fall comes, and Catherine and her daughter come to the lake with Eddie and his brother. There, she learns that their parents are already dead. Eddie shares that he plays musical instruments, and he loves music. Meanwhile, George has already built a good reputation at the university. So his colleague, Justine, invites him and his wife to her home. She takes a look at his office, and notices the small paintings of the sea. She compliments it, saying it's unique. At night, Catherine wakes up from the smell of the car exhaust. George suggests that it must be because their room is above the garage. So Catherine goes down to air out the smell. There, she suddenly hears the piano playing, but when she takes a look at it, no one is there. Their daughter screams in fear from her room, as she sees the ghost of the former owner of the house. But George thinks that their daughter just has bad dreams. The following day, Catherine finds Swedenborg's book, and becomes interested in it. Meanwhile, George comes outside to take a short jog. He passes through Beauty's place. He follows her, and finds her lying on bed. He gets seduced, and sleeps with her. Back at the house, Catherine calls her mom. She shares that she sees ghosts in the house, but she is reluctant to reveal them to George, thinking that he might believe she is crazy. After some time, George arrives back home, giving her a flower. But she secretly throws it away. As George is about to go to work, he encounters Eddie. He instructs Eddie not to inform Catherine that they formerly lived in the house. Eddie replies he is there only for honest work. At night, George arrives back home. He sees Eddie playing the piano, while Catherine is listening on the side. George then sarcastically remarks that Eddie playing the piano for his wife is part of the honest work. So Eddie stops playing it, and says Catherine requests it. In response, George lets him continue. In their sleep, Catherine dreams about her finding a creepy organism in the sink, with a horny eye staring at her like a peeping Tom. She sees George smiling behind her, and she suddenly wakes up. Meanwhile, their daughter sees the lady ghost in the house, smiling at her. The following day, George takes a morning run again on Beauty's bed. After their forbidden affair, Beauty realizes George thinks she is a fool, so she gets angry at him. She ends their relationship and storms out. Later, George and Catherine visit Justine and her husband in their house. She learns about Justine's weaving hobby. Justine then invites her to a women's art club in the area. After that, George and Catherine drive back home. Along the way, George jokingly speeds up their car, making Catherine angry at him. She walks out of the car. He follows her outside, and she suddenly rants about their shitty life. She thinks that she is just always following his wants, but she does not have her own life. He then tells her to go back to the car, and pulls her forcefully, which hurts her. After that, they arrive back home, and George apologizes for it. But it seems that the spirit there is not happy about it, as the clown light suddenly breaks. The next day, Catherine joins Justine in the women's art club. Her bruise is obvious to Justine. She comes home at night, and she is still cold at George for hurting her. The following day, George comes sailing with the university chairperson. He reveals that he inherited a boat from his artist cousin, who got drowned riding it. After his cousin's death, he repeatedly reads his diary. George suggests that the cousin's death ends the cousin's sufferings, but the Swedenborg believer chairperson believes that death is only the beginning. He then asks George if he has already read the Swedenborg book. At night, George invites the chairperson to their home. To the chairperson's surprise, Catherine is reading the Swedenborg book, so he explains to her that the book cover art depicts the transition of the soul to the afterlife. Further, he explains that the artist believes death is similar to birth, but more divine, possibly because the soul is having a rebirth to the supernatural world after death. After that, Catherine shows the chairperson around the house. Suddenly, he notices a figure passing by, so he tells her there is a spirit roaming around the house. Catherine affirms, but she is afraid to share it with her husband. In response, the chairperson says that the lady ghost is there to protect Catherine and her daughter. She then replies that she is doing research about the former owners of the house. The chairperson promises to help her to find sources. He then suggests holding a seance in their house. After he leaves, George gets excited and plans to have a party at their house. At the party night, the realtor accidentally spills to Catherine that Eddie and his brother are a child of the Vale couple, who formerly lived in the house. Catherine gets surprised, since she doesn't even know the history of their house. Apparently, her husband keeps it a secret. Catherine then forces the realtor to share it. So the realtor reveals when the Vale couple lived in the house, the husband sedated his wife, Ella Vale. After that, he closed the windows and turned on the truck engine in the garage. He then shared the bed with his wife, where they got asphyxiated by the fumes. After hearing that, Catherine realizes why it smelled like car exhaust fumes in their room. She then realizes that the ring she found in their house must belong to Ella Vale. In the end, she gets disappointed in George for keeping everything a secret from her. After the party, Catherine angrily asks her husband why he did not reveal the house's tragic past. But he insists that he just wants to make her happy in their new house. As they are arguing, the radio suddenly plays a static sound. He removes its electricity source, but it doesn't stop. So he breaks it, and it finally turns off. During the weekends, Catherine continues with her research. She finds out that the spirit in their house belongs to Ella Vale. Later, she shares her research at the seance with the chairperson and her neighbors. The chairperson reveals that the Smith couple, who originally owned the house, also has strong disagreements. The chairperson believes that the Smith wife is the one who opens the spiritual realm in the house. They suggest to Catherine that Ella's spirit is trying to protect her, like a guardian angel. They add that evil spirits can be attracted by an evildoer. After that, they declare the prayer, calling Ella's spirit. But an evil spirit is preventing Ella's spirit from coming out. The chairperson then warns Catherine that she needs to be careful of the evil spirit. The following day, Catherine returns George's book to the library, and she finds out that Beauty's name is registered as the borrower. Their daughter utters that Beauty is Daddy's friend. She then gets suspicious of her hormone rival. Meanwhile, George and Justine go on a trip to an art museum with their student. There, George encounters his dissertation professor, who wonders how George became a professor. Apparently, George needs a recommendation letter to be a professor. He explains that he is just a temporary instructor. Justine hears their conversation and asks George about it, but he just shrugs it off. At night, George tells Catherine to be distant from Justine. He says Justine must be instigating a problem between him and Catherine, but she just dismisses it. The next day, the university chairperson reveals to George that he received a call from his dissertation professor. It is then revealed that George forged his recommendation letter. In response, George pleads to give him a chance to explain, so the chairperson sets a meeting for them. At their family dinner, George's mother shares that George's cousin is an excellent painter who painted unique small pictures of the sea. Catherine then figures out that George stole his cousin's painting, pretending to be an artist. She storms out of the dinner table and goes to the bathroom. George follows her, and Ella's spirit closes the bathroom door. After the dinner, George hears whispers from the evil spirit, saying he should free himself. The following day, the chairperson and George sail in the water. The chairperson reveals that he does not have any choice but to report George's forgery. This would lead to George's immediate removal from the university. So George drowns the chairperson in the waters. Meanwhile, Catherine is crying as she thinks about George's actions. Eddie comes to comfort her, and they suddenly get intimate with each other. In the meantime, Justine encounters Beauty wearing the scarf she gave to George. At night, Justine sees George soaking wet. She asks him about the scarf. She also asks him to explain his encounter with his dissertation professor in the museum. George replies that she should spit out her suspicions. In response, she says she will spit it out and drives away. He follows her and hits her car, which leads to her car crash. George goes back home, and Catherine finds him soaking wet. George talks to the evil spirit and asks it to show a sign. Just then, a big black bird enters their window, breaking it. George then tells Catherine to let her boyfriend Eddie fix it. The following day, Catherine visits Justine, who is in a coma. After that, Catherine learns about the death of the university chairperson in the waters. She then thinks George might be responsible for it. Meanwhile, George comes to the class and finds the presentation slides only show the art of spiritual passage. He gets mad and decides to come home early. He drives back home, but the snow is already falling, marking the beginning of winter. He finds Catherine's things in her car, already packed up, and their daughter is dressed. So he puts the drug in Catherine's protein supplement and lets her drink it. Just then, the two start arguing, as Catherine reveals that she already knows about George's bad acts. George then calls her paranoid. Shortly after, the drug takes effect, and she starts being dizzy, but she still tries her best to get her daughter inside. Right then, Ella's spirit shows up, and she promises to try her best to help Catherine, since the spirit of Smith's wife also tried to help Ella when her husband drugged her. But then the evil spirit pushes Ella's spirit away, preventing her from protecting Catherine. Catherine tries to make a call, but she has already fallen asleep. George walks in, holding an axe, while the evil spirit whispers at him. He then goes to chop Catherine with the axe. Ella's spirit goes inside her and tries her best to protect her, but in the end, Catherine's blood splatters around, and she dies. The next day, George continues with his usual routine. He lets Eddie's brother babysit his daughter, but he reminds the brother not to disturb Catherine because she is sick. He then goes to the university for his work. After some days, he drives back home, and Catherine's blood drops from their room. He finally reports to the police that he found Catherine's body already dead. The police interrogate him, but his alibi works, so they have to let him go. Later, Beauty meets Eddie, and they both believe George is responsible for it. Eddie tries to convince the police, but he does not have any evidence. The police also believe George did it, but they cannot find any evidence at this point. Apparently, the police also can never prove that Ella's husband is responsible for Ella's death. The next day, Justine dreams about Catherine and Ella's spirits. She then suddenly wakes up from a coma to testify against George. She sends a message to George that she remembers everything. After that, she calls the police and proceeds to testify. George receives the message, and the evil spirit whispers at him, blaming them for his evil actions. He then rides his cousin's boat to the middle of the sea. Along the way, a strong storm passes by. Just then, the gates of hell open up. He tries to navigate back, but the gates of hell welcome him as a punishment for his evil acts. In the end, the scene appears to be similar to the art in Swedenborg's book, but this time it depicts a soul transitioning to hell. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.